When the last evacuation ship disappeared into the void, leaving behind a dying world and its forgotten people, the galaxy collectively turned its back on what it deemed a lost cause. But, in the darkness of abandonment, something unexpected happened. The humans, those stubborn newcomers who everyone said were too young, too reckless, too emotional to matter in galactic politics, did something that would echo through the stars for generations. They stayed. This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became the galaxy's salvation, and how the most overlooked species in known space became the guardians of those who had been left to die. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance against indifference can reshape the very fabric of civilization itself. The warning came through the Galactic Communication Network at 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Every species with the technology to receive it heard the same message broadcast across thousands of light-years: the Zalari homeworld of Kethra was dying, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the human vessel Defiant Hope, watching the stream of evacuation ships fleeing the planet below. The massive vessels of the Eltarian Republic, the sleek cruisers of the Vorthan Empire, and dozens of other spacecraft from various galactic civilizations formed a steady procession away from the doomed world. Each ship carried thousands of refugees, but Sarah knew the mathematics were grim. Kethra held nearly 2 billion Zalari, and the evacuation fleet could maybe save 20% of them before the planet's unstable core finally collapsed. Captain, her first officer, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, approached with a data pad in his weathered hands. The Galactic Council has issued the final evacuation order. All non-essential vessels are to withdraw to minimum safe distance within the next 6 hours. Sarah studied the tactical display showing Kethra's deteriorating condition. The planet's surface was already cracking along massive fault lines, and the core temperature readings were climbing past critical thresholds. Volcanic eruptions had begun across 3 continents, and the atmospheric composition was shifting toward toxic levels. In perhaps 48 hours, maybe less, Kethra would tear itself apart in a spectacular display of geological violence. Non-essential vessels, Sarah repeated, her voice carrying a bitter edge. That's what they call us, isn't it? The humans. Too new to the galactic community to matter. Too primitive to contribute anything meaningful to the evacuation effort. Webb shifted uncomfortably. He had served under Sarah for 3 years and knew that tone. It usually meant she was about to do something that would either save lives or get them all court-martialed. Sometimes both. The communication system crackled to life, and the distinctive harmonious voice of Ambassador Threnka of the Eltarian Republic filled the bridge. Human vessel Defiant Hope, this is Ambassador Threnka aboard the evacuation coordinator Mercy's wing. You are ordered to withdraw to safe distance immediately. Your vessel lacks the capacity for meaningful contribution to evacuation efforts, and your presence in the danger zone serves no purpose. Sarah looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. 38 men and women who had volunteered for this mission, knowing full well that the galactic community saw them as little more than curious primitives playing with technology they barely understood. Earth had only achieved faster-than-light travel 27 years ago, making humanity the newest member of the Galactic Council by several centuries. Threnka, Sarah replied, her voice steady and professional despite the anger building inside her. The Defiant Hope may not be the largest ship in this fleet, but we have cargo capacity and life support systems. We can save lives. Negative, Captain Chen. The Zalari require specialized atmospheric conditions and dietary supplements that your vessel cannot provide. Withdraw immediately, or we will be forced to classify you as an obstruction to evacuation efforts. The connection terminated with a sharp click, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Sarah stared at the main view screen, watching another massive Altarian transport lift away from the planet's surface. She could see the smaller dots of individual Zalari evacuation pods being tractored aboard, each one representing a family, a life saved from certain death. Captain, Webb said quietly, maybe we should belay that, Sarah interrupted, her decision crystallizing in her mind. Communications, open a channel to the planet's surface. I want to speak directly to the Zalari evacuation coordinators. Ensign Rodriguez, their communications officer, hesitated. Ma'am, the Galactic Council has assumed control of all planetary communications. They've established protocols. I don't care about their protocols, Ensign.
Find me someone down there who can actually speak for the Zalari people, not their self-appointed galactic representatives.
It took Rodriguez several minutes of creative signal routing, but eventually she managed to establish a direct link to a Zalari emergency coordination center in one of Kethera's northern cities. The face that appeared on screen was distinctly non-human, with the elongated features and silver-blue skin characteristic of the Zalari species. But the exhaustion and desperation in those large, dark eyes was entirely universal.
"This is Coordinator Veshlin of the Kethera Emergency Response Center," the Zalari said, their voice carrying the musical quality that made their language beautiful even in crisis.
"Who is this?" "All official evacuation communications are supposed to be routed through Coordinator Veshlin. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the human ship Defiant Hope."
"I'm going to be direct because time is running short. How many of your people are still waiting for evacuation?"
Veshlin's expression shifted to something between hope and confusion. "Captain Chen, the official count shows approximately 1.6 billion Zalari still require evacuation, but the Galactic Fleet coordinators have informed us that current transport capacity is insufficient.
They estimate that perhaps 300 million additional evacuees can be accommodated before mandatory withdrawal."
Sarah felt her heart sink.
1.6 billion.
People with families, dreams, entire lives about to be snuffed out because the galaxy had decided the mathematics didn't work out in their favor.
"What about smaller settlements?" Sarah asked. "Rural areas, isolated communities that might not be on the evacuation priority lists?"
The galactic coordinators have focused efforts on major population centers for maximum efficiency, Veshlin admitted, and Sarah could hear the pain in their voice. Smaller communities, particularly those in remote regions or those with insufficient communication infrastructure, have been classified as secondary priority.
"The reality is that there simply isn't time to reach everyone."
Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of Earth's own history.
How many times had powerful nations or organizations written off entire populations as acceptable losses? How many times had bureaucratic efficiency trumped individual lives?
She opened her eyes and looked at Veshlin's desperate face.
"Coordinator, I need you to send me the locations of those secondary priority communities. All of them." "Captain Chen, I don't understand. Even if I provide that information, what can one ship accomplish?"
"I mean no disrespect, but your vessel appears quite small compared to the evacuation fleet."
Sarah smiled grimly. "Coordinator, you're about to learn something important about humans.
We're exceptionally good at accomplishing things that other people say are impossible."
"Send me those coordinates."
As the data began flowing to the Defiant Hope, Webb moved closer to Sarah's command chair.
"Captain, what exactly are we planning here?"
"That's a lot of ground to cover, and we don't have much time. We're going to do what humans do best, Marcus," Sarah replied, already beginning to formulate a plan that would probably violate half a dozen galactic regulations and definitely put her crew at enormous risk. "We're going to refuse to accept that some people don't matter."
On the view screen, the last of the major galactic vessels was pulling away from Kethera's atmosphere.
Soon, the Defiant Hope would be alone with a dying planet and over 1 billion souls that the galaxy had decided weren't worth saving. But Sarah Chen had never been particularly good at accepting other people's decisions about what was or wasn't possible.
And, right now, that stubborn human trait might be the only thing standing between the Zalari people and extinction. "Helm, take us into atmosphere," she ordered. "Communications, start calculating routes to every settlement on Veshlin's list."
"Engineering, I want maximum efficiency from our life support systems and every cubic meter of cargo space converted for passenger use."
"Captain," Webb said carefully, "this is going to be incredibly dangerous.
The planet is destabilizing, we'll be operating with minimal backup, and if something goes wrong, then something goes wrong," Sarah replied simply.
"But we don't abandon people just because saving them is difficult. That's what makes us human."
As the Defiant Hope descended toward Kethera's troubled surface, Sarah couldn't help but think that maybe being considered too primitive for galactic politics wasn't such a bad thing after all. Sometimes it took a supposedly lesser species to remind the galaxy what civilization was supposed to mean. The first settlement on their list was a small mining community called Threnvac, population roughly 8,000, located in the planet's southern continent near an active volcanic region. According to the Galactic Evacuation Coordinators, it was too small and too remote to justify the resource allocation. According to Captain Sarah Chan and the crew of the Defiant Hope, those 8,000 lives were about to become the most important mission in human history. The real work was just beginning. The mining settlement of Threnvac clung to the side of Mount Calvara like a metallic parasite, its modular structures connected by enclosed walkways that snaked around the mountain's harsh terrain. As the Defiant Hope descended through Kethera's increasingly turbulent atmosphere, Sarah could see the wisdom in the Galactic Evacuation Planner's decision to bypass this place. The settlement was indeed remote, accessible only by a narrow landing strip carved into the mountainside, and the volcanic activity in the region was accelerating rapidly. It was also home to 8,000 Zalari who were going to die in the next 36 hours if nobody helped them. Captain Ensign Rodriguez called from the communications station, "I'm getting multiple distress signals from the settlement. Their local communication array is damaged, but I'm picking up emergency broadcasts on several frequencies."
"Can you establish contact?"
"Working on it, there, got them."
"Audio only, the video feed is corrupted."
The voice that came through the speakers was strained and filled with static, but the words were clear enough.
"Unknown vessel, this is Settlement Coordinator Kreshmol of Threnvac.
Please identify yourself and state your intentions."
"We have been advised that evacuation efforts for our settlement have been suspended due to resource constraints." Sarah took the communication personally. "Settlement Coordinator Kreshmol, this is Captain Sarah Chen aboard the human vessel Defiant Hope. We're here to evacuate your people."
The silence that followed stretched so long that Sarah wondered if they had lost the connection.
Finally, Kreshmol's voice returned, heavy with disbelief. "Captain Chen, did you say human vessel? As in, the species that joined the galactic community only recently? I was told that human ships lack the proper facilities for Zalari evacuation." "Coordinator, with respect to whoever told you that, they were wrong.
We have life support systems that can be adapted for Zalari physiology, and we have cargo space.
Most importantly, we have the will to try. How many people are we looking at?"
8,237 souls, including 400 children under the age of maturity.
Sarah did quick calculations in her head.
The Defiant Hope had been designed as a long-range exploration and cargo vessel, not a passenger transport. Under normal circumstances, their maximum passenger capacity was maybe 300 people. But these weren't normal circumstances, and humans had a long history of making impossible things work through sheer stubbornness and creative engineering. "We can do it," she said, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. "We'll need to make multiple trips, but we can get everyone out."
"What's your timeline before the volcanic activity becomes too dangerous for landing?" "Unknown, Captain.
The geological surveys are inconsistent. We could have 6 hours, or we could have 30 minutes.
The seismic activity has been increasing exponentially."
As if summoned by Kreshmol's words, the Defiant Hope shuddered as they passed through a particularly violent atmospheric disturbance.
Webb checked his instruments and frowned. "Captain, I'm reading massive electromagnetic interference from multiple volcanic eruptions across the planet.
It's going to make navigation increasingly difficult."
"Helm, take us down to the landing strip."
"Carefully."
The approach to Threnvac's landing facility was harrowing.
Pilot Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka had to navigate between towering columns of volcanic ash and dodge chunks of molten rock being hurled from nearby Mount Calvara. The ship's shields flared repeatedly as they deflected debris, and the atmospheric turbulence was so severe that everyone on the bridge had to secure themselves in their seats. "I can see the settlement," Tanaka reported, her voice tight with concentration. "The landing strip is intact, but, Captain, the volcanic activity is getting worse. I'm reading multiple lava flows that weren't there when we started our approach."
Through the main view screen, Sarah could see Threnvac clearly now.
The settlement's structures were built from a silvery metal that seemed to absorb and reflect the orange glow of the surrounding volcanic activity. Zalari figures could be seen moving between buildings, loading what appeared to be personal belongings and essential supplies onto hover sleds. They had been preparing for evacuation that they thought would never come.
"Take us down," Sarah ordered. The landing was rough but successful. As soon as the Defiant Hope touched down on the narrow strip of reinforced metal that served as Threnback's spaceport, Sarah was moving.
She grabbed her emergency gear and headed for the airlock, with Webb and a small landing party right behind her. The atmosphere outside was breathable for humans, but barely. The air was thick with ash and sulfurous gases that made everyone's eyes water and throats burn. The temperature was at least 15 degrees higher than it should have been, and the ground trembled constantly under their feet with minor seismic activity.
Settlement Coordinator Kreshmol was waiting for them at the base of the ship's ramp.
Like all Zalari, they were tall and graceful, with an elongated build and skin that shifted between silver and blue depending on the light. But there was nothing graceful about the exhaustion and fear written across their features. Captain Chen, Kreshmol said, extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting that they had obviously researched. I confess, when your ship appeared on our sensors, I thought perhaps the stress of the situation had caused me to hallucinate. The galactic coordinators were very clear that no additional evacuation resources would be allocated to settlements like ours. Sarah shook the offered hand, noting how the Zalari's skin felt cool and slightly rough, like fine sandpaper. Coordinator, the galactic coordinators aren't the only ones with ships and the ability to make decisions.
How organized are your people? Can you get them moving quickly?
They have been ready for evacuation for the past 18 hours, Kreshmol replied with obvious pride. When we learned that we were not on the primary evacuation list, we did not simply accept our fate. Everyone has prepared emergency supplies, identified essential items to preserve our culture and history, and organized into family groups for efficient transport. Webb was already running calculations on his portable computer. Captain, if we strip out everything non-essential and reconfigure the cargo bays for maximum passenger capacity, we can take maybe 1,200 people per trip. That's 7 trips minimum, assuming perfect conditions.
Sarah looked around at the volcanic hellscape surrounding them. Perfect conditions seemed unlikely. How long per round trip to get clear of the planet's atmosphere and back down again?
Under normal circumstances, maybe 40 minutes.
With the atmospheric interference and volcanic debris, call it an hour per trip. 7 hours.
Sarah looked at Mount Calvara, which was now spewing a steady stream of lava and ash into the darkening sky. The mountain didn't look like it had 7 hours left in it, and neither did the settlement clinging to its slopes. We need to go faster, she said.
Coordinator Kreshmol, I need you to prioritize passengers.
Children and elderly first, obviously, but after that I need your smartest, most adaptable adults.
People who can help us figure out how to pack more passengers safely and efficiently.
Captain Chen, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I will not ask some of my people to wait for evacuation so that others might have a better chance.
We are all Zalari.
We all deserve the same consideration. Sarah felt a surge of respect for the Zalari coordinator.
Even facing extinction, they refused to abandon their principles.
It was exactly the kind of moral courage that had convinced Sarah to attempt this rescue in the first place.
I'm not asking you to leave anyone behind, Sarah said. I'm asking you to help me figure out how to save everyone.
We're going to need your engineers and your most creative problem solvers on the first trip so they can help us reconfigure the ship for maximum efficiency. Understanding dawned in Kreshmol's large eyes. You want our people to help design their own evacuation?
Exactly. This isn't a human rescue mission.
This is a joint operation between humans and Zalari to prove that impossible is just another word for difficult. The first group of evacuees began boarding the Defiant Hope within 30 minutes. Sarah watched as Zalari families said goodbye to their homes, loading precious items and cultural artifacts that represented generations of history. Children who had never been off-planet before stared in wonder at their first spaceship, while their parents tried to hide their own fear and amazement. In the ship's hastily reconfigured cargo bay, Chief Engineer Lisa Park was working with a group of Zalari technicians to optimize the life support systems. The Zalari, it turned out, required slightly higher humidity and a different atmospheric gas mixture than humans, but their engineering knowledge was incredibly sophisticated. Within an hour, they had developed a hybrid life support system that could accommodate both species comfortably.
Captain, Park reported over the comm system, these Zalari engineers are brilliant.
They've shown us how to increase our passenger capacity by at least 30% without compromising safety.
The first evacuation flight launched just as Mount Calvara began showing signs of truly catastrophic activity.
As the Defiant Hope climbed through Kethera's atmosphere with its cargo of terrified but hopeful refugees, Sarah could see through the viewports that the mountain was beginning to collapse in on itself. Huge sections of the settlement were already being consumed by advancing lava flows. But they had saved 1,200 lives, and they were just getting started. The safe zone where they dropped off the first group of evacuees was a massive space station positioned at the edge of the Kethera system. As the Zalari refugees disembarked, Sarah could see the confusion and amazement on the faces of the galactic evacuation coordinators. Nobody had expected a human ship to show up with evacuees from a settlement that had been written off as unreachable.
Ambassador Threnka of the Altarian Republic was waiting at the docking bay, his expression unreadable. "Captain Chen, I must admit I am surprised to see you here.
When you failed to acknowledge our withdrawal order, we assumed your vessel had been damaged or destroyed."
"Sorry to disappoint you, Ambassador. We were busy doing what apparently everyone else decided was impossible." "You evacuated settlement Threnvac?"
"That facility was assessed as unreachable due to volcanic activity and inadequate landing infrastructure." Sarah felt her temper rising.
"Ambassador, that facility was home to 8,000 people who deserved to live just as much as anyone else.
And we're going back for the rest of them."
Threnka's expression shifted to something approaching alarm. "Captain, I cannot permit you to return to the planet.
The geological destabilization is accelerating beyond all predictions. Mount Calvara is entering a catastrophic eruption phase that will likely trigger a chain reaction across the entire volcanic region."
"Then, we'd better move fast."
"Captain Chen, I am ordering you, as the senior representative of the Galactic Council in this system, to cease your evacuation attempts immediately. Your vessel will remain at this station pending a full investigation into your violation of evacuation protocols." Sarah looked at the ambassador for a long moment, then, at the Zalari refugees who were watching this exchange with growing understanding and fear. These people had been abandoned by the galactic community, written off as acceptable losses in the name of efficiency and practicality. "Ambassador," Sarah said quietly, "with all due respect to your authority and the Galactic Council, go to hell." She turned and walked back toward her ship, leaving Threnka sputtering in outrage behind her.
6 more trips. 6 more chances to prove that human stubbornness could overcome galactic indifference.
The real test was just beginning.
The second trip to Threnvac was worse than the first in every measurable way. Mount Calvara was now in full catastrophic eruption, hurling house-sized chunks of molten rock thousands of meters into the air.
The atmospheric interference had increased to the point where their navigation systems were operating at barely 50% efficiency, and the landing strip was now partially covered by a slow-moving lava flow. But, somehow, it was also easier.
The reason became clear as soon as the Defiant Hope broke through the ash cloud and approached the settlement.
Instead of the chaotic scene Sarah had expected, she found the remaining Zalari organized into precise groups, with engineering teams already working to clear the landing area of debris and volcanic ash. They had used the time during the first evacuation to optimize everything. "Captain," Tanaka called from the pilot station, "I'm getting a direct navigation signal from the settlement.
They've set up some kind of guidance beacon."
On the communications channel, Kreshmol's voice was steady despite the chaos around them.
"Captain Chen, we have prepared a modified approach vector that should minimize your exposure to volcanic debris. Our engineers have also completed modifications to our personnel transport systems that should reduce boarding time by approximately 40%. Sarah felt a surge of admiration for the Zalari.
Faced with extinction, they hadn't given up or dissolved into panic. They had gotten organized, analyzed the problem, and started solving it. It was exactly the kind of rational courage that Sarah respected.
"Understood, Coordinator. We're also bringing you some presents."
During the brief stopover at the evacuation station, the Zalari refugees from the first trip had done more than just thank their human rescuers. They had worked with Chief Engineer Park to design specialized passenger restraint systems that could safely accommodate 30% more evacuees per trip. More importantly, they had convinced several other Zalari refugees from other settlements to donate their specialized atmospheric regulation equipment. The second evacuation run took 1,400 Zalari off Mount Calvara, including most of the remaining children and elderly. But it also accomplished something else. It began to attract attention from the wider galaxy. As the Defiant Hope docked at the evacuation station for the second time, Sarah noticed that the docking bay was considerably more crowded than before. Representatives from a dozen different species were present, including several she didn't recognize. Ambassador Threnka was conspicuously absent, but his replacement, a stern-looking Eltarian named Vexcor, was waiting with what appeared to be a formal document. Captain Chen, Vexcor announced as Sarah disembarked with her latest group of refugees, by order of the Galactic Council Emergency Coordination Committee, you are hereby commanded to cease all unauthorized evacuation activities and submit your vessel for immediate impoundment pending a full investigation. Sarah barely paused. File a complaint. Captain, this is not a request. You are in violation of multiple galactic emergency protocols, and your continued interference with official evacuation procedures is saving lives, Sarah interrupted. If that's against galactic protocols, then maybe your protocols need revision. But it was one of the Zalari refugees who provided the most effective response. Veshlin, the emergency coordinator Sarah had first contacted on the planet's surface, stepped forward and addressed Vexcor directly. Ambassador Vexcor, I am curious about something. When the Galactic Council made the decision to classify settlements like Threnvac as secondary priority, what was the basis for that determination? The decision was made based on standard efficiency calculations, Vexcor replied stiffly. Limited resources required prioritization of evacuation efforts toward areas of maximum population density and strategic importance. I see. And, when the Council calculated the resource requirements for evacuating these secondary priority settlements, did they include human vessels in their calculations? Vexcor hesitated. Human vessels were, the human space fleet was deemed insufficient for large-scale evacuation operations. Insufficient based on what assessment? Did anyone actually ask the humans if they were willing and able to help with evacuation efforts? The silence that followed was telling. Sarah realized that Veshlin was methodically exposing the fundamental flaw in the Galactic Council's approach. They had never actually tried to coordinate with human rescue capabilities. They had simply assumed that humanity was too primitive to contribute meaningfully to the crisis. The point, Veshlin continued, is that Captain Chan and her crew are proving that the Council's assumptions were incorrect. They are successfully evacuating people that your efficiency calculations had condemned to death. Perhaps the question should not be whether Captain Chen is violating protocols, but whether those protocols are worth following. More attention meant more complications, but it also meant more opportunities. As Sarah prepared for the third evacuation run, she discovered that word of the human rescue efforts had spread throughout the evacuation fleet. Several smaller vessels from various species had quietly approached the station administrators asking about the possibility of joining the rescue efforts. The third trip brought another innovation. A group of Zalari atmospheric engineers had developed a temporary life support extension system that could be rapidly deployed in the Defiant Hope's secondary cargo areas. With this system, they could safely evacuate nearly 2,000 people per trip. But Mount Calvara was running out of patience. Captain Webb reported as they approached Threnvac for the third time, seismic activity has increased by 400% since our last trip. The settlement's geologists estimate that the entire mountain face could collapse at any time. Through the viewscreen, Sarah could see that large sections of Threnvac had already been abandoned as the lava flows advanced. The remaining population had consolidated in the settlement's central core, a cluster of reinforced buildings built around the landing strip. But even that safe zone was shrinking rapidly. How many people left? Sarah asked as they touched down on a landing strip that was now partially molten at both ends. Approximately 4,000, Kreshmol replied, but their voice was strained. Captain, I must be honest with you. Our geological teams believe we have perhaps 2 more hours before the mountain becomes completely unstable. Even with your improved evacuation capacity, I do not believe we can evacuate everyone in time. It was Chief Engineer Park who provided the solution, and it came from an unexpected source, the Zalari themselves. Captain, Park's voice came over the comm system. I've been working with the Zalari engineers, and they've shown me something interesting about their industrial transport systems. These people have been moving massive amounts of mining equipment around this mountain for decades.
they have heavy lift systems that we could adapt. The idea was audacious, dangerous, and probably insane. Instead of trying to evacuate everyone through multiple trips, they would use the settlement's own industrial equipment to load the entire remaining population onto the Defiant Hope in a single massive operation. It will require completely reconfiguring our cargo systems, Park explained as Sarah reviewed the proposal. We'll be operating at about 200% of our normal passenger capacity, and the life support systems will be pushed far beyond their design limits. If anything goes wrong, how long to set up? Sarah asked. Maybe an hour, with the Zalari engineers helping. Do it. What followed was the most intense hour of Sarah's life. While Park and the Zalari engineering teams worked frantically to modify both the ship and the settlement's transport systems, Sarah coordinated with Kreshmol to organize the entire remaining population for rapid evacuation. Families were grouped by size and mobility, essential supplies were prioritized and consolidated, and evacuation routes were planned and rehearsed. Meanwhile, Mount Calvara continued its violent death throes. Massive explosions sent shockwaves through the settlement every few minutes, and the lava flows had advanced to within 100 meters of the central core. The air was now so thick with ash and toxic gases that everyone had to wear emergency breathing apparatus. Captain, Kreshmol said as they watched their people loading onto the Defiant Hope in organized waves, I want you to know that what you have done here goes far beyond simple rescue operations. You have shown my people something that I think we had begun to lose, hope that the galaxy still contains those who refuse to abandon the helpless. Coordinator, your people have shown us something too, Sarah replied. You've proven that even facing extinction, intelligence and courage can overcome impossible odds. We couldn't have done this without your engineers and your organization. The final loading took 37 minutes. 4,112 Zalari, plus their most precious cultural artifacts and essential supplies, were packed into a ship designed to carry maybe 1,200 passengers. The life support systems were operating at 190% capacity, the structural stress indicators were flashing warning signals, and the power systems were drawing energy from every available source. As the Defiant Hope lifted off from Threnvac for the final time, Mount Calvara finally surrendered to the geological forces that had been building inside it for months. The entire mountain face collapsed in a spectacular cascade of molten rock and superheated gases. The settlement where 8,000 people had lived and worked for generations was consumed in seconds. But those 8,000 people were safe, aboard a human ship that had refused to accept that some lives weren't worth saving. The flight to the evacuation station was harrowing. The ship was operating at its absolute limits, and everyone aboard could feel the stress in every vibration and system alarm. But the hybrid life support systems held, the structural modifications proved sound, and, most importantly, the Zalari passengers remained calm and organized throughout the journey. When the Defiant Hope docked at the evacuation station, the entire bay erupted in what could only be described as chaos. The station administrators had never seen anything like the massive evacuation that emerged from the human ship. Representatives from dozens of species pressed forward to witness what everyone had said was impossible. But it was Ambassador Threnka, who had apparently returned to oversee Sarah's arrest, who provided the most memorable reaction. This is impossible, he stated flatly, staring at the endless stream of Zalari evacuees. No single ship can safely evacuate 4,000 individuals. The life support requirements alone are well within manageable parameters when you combine human engineering with Zalari innovation, Sarah interrupted. Turns out that when you actually work together instead of making assumptions about who can and can't contribute, amazing things become possible. Threnka looked from Sarah to the Zalari evacuees to the ship that had somehow accomplished something his computers had calculated as impossible. Captain Chen, how did you? We listened, Sarah said simply. We listened to people who needed help, we listened to engineers who knew how to solve problems, and we listened to our own consciences when they told us that abandoning people was wrong. Sometimes that's all it takes. The rescue of Threnvac was complete, but Sarah knew it was just the beginning. As word of what had happened spread through the galactic community, other voices began to speak up. Other small settlements that had been written off as unreachable. Other populations that had been deemed acceptable losses. The galaxy was about to learn that humans had a very different definition of acceptable losses than the one that appeared in their efficiency calculations.
Word traveled fast through the galactic communication networks. Within 6 hours of the Threnvac evacuation, Sarah found herself facing a problem she hadn't anticipated: success. The docking bay of the evacuation station had become an impromptu conference center, filled with representatives from species Sarah had never heard of, all carrying datapads with information about other unreachable populations scattered across Kethera's dying surface. What had started as one ship's desperate attempt to save one settlement had somehow become a symbol of hope for everyone the galaxy had given up on. Captain Shan, a tall, insectoid being with translucent wings, introduced itself. "I am Hive Speaker Zixna of the Kirilleth Collective. We have received communications from 3 Zalari settlements in the northern polar regions. Populations of approximately 6,000, 4,000, and 12,000 respectively. The Galactic Evacuation Coordinators have classified these settlements as inaccessible due to severe weather conditions and inadequate landing facilities." Sarah studied the datapad Zixna offered, noting the challenging terrain and extreme atmospheric conditions around the polar settlements. How long before the planet becomes completely uninhabitable? Current geological projections suggest perhaps 18 to 20 hours before catastrophic core collapse, replied Dr. Marin Voss, a Zalari scientist who had arrived on one of the earlier evacuation ships. However, the polar regions may remain stable for slightly longer due to their distance from the primary volcanic zones. 18 hours. 3 settlements. 22,000 lives. "Captain," Webb said quietly, pulling her aside, "we need to talk about logistics. The Defiant Hope is already showing stress fractures from the last evacuation. Chief Park estimates we can maybe handle 2 more high-capacity runs before we risk catastrophic structural failure." Sarah looked around the docking bay, taking in the faces of the aliens who had gathered here. Some she recognized from her previous encounters with galactic bureaucracy, careful, efficient beings who calculated everything in terms of acceptable losses and resource allocation. But others were different. She could see the same desperate hope in their eyes that she had seen in Coordinator Kreshmol's face when the Defiant Hope had first appeared over Threnvac. "What about other ships?" she asked. "Surely some of the species represented here have vessels that could help with evacuation efforts." Ambassador Vexcor, who had been conspicuously quiet since the successful Threnvac evacuation, stepped forward. "Captain Shan, while the Galactic Council appreciates your initiative in the Threnvac situation, we cannot authorize additional unauthorized evacuation attempts." "The risk factors? Are you kidding me?" Sarah interrupted, her voice rising with incredulous anger. "We just saved 8,000 people that your efficiency calculations had written off as dead, and you're still talking about authorization and risk factors?" It was Coordinator Veshlin who provided the answer that changed everything. "Captain Chen, I believe the ambassador is operating under a misunderstanding. The Galactic Council doesn't need to authorize anything. This is a Zalari emergency on a Zalari world, and we have the right to coordinate our own rescue efforts with any willing partners." The silence that followed was profound. Sarah realized that Veshlin had just identified the fundamental legal and moral flaw in the galactic evacuation approach. They had assumed authority over Zalari rescue operations without ever actually consulting the Zalari people about what they wanted. "Coordinator," Sarah said carefully, "are you officially requesting human assistance with additional evacuation operations?" "I am officially requesting assistance from any species with the capability and willingness to help save my people," Veshlin replied. "If the Galactic Council wishes to contribute to these efforts, they are welcome to do so. If they do not, that is their choice." The transformation that followed was remarkable. Within an hour, the impromptu gathering in the docking bay had become an actual multi-species rescue coordination center. The Kirilleth Collective contributed 2 fast scout ships capable of operating in extreme weather conditions. A Vorthan trade vessel volunteered its massive cargo capacity for refugee transport. Even a small contingent of Altarian medical ships joined the effort, apparently acting without official government approval. But it was the arrival of 3 additional human ships that really changed the game. Captain Elena Vasquez of the exploration vessel Wanderer's Dream was the first to arrive, followed closely by Captain James Morrison of the cargo hauler Second Chance and Captain Maria Santos of the scientific survey ship Curiosity's Edge. All 3 had received Sarah's emergency broadcasts to the human fleet and had diverted from their own missions to help. "Thought you could use some backup," Vasquez said with a grin as she joined the rescue coordination meeting. Besides, we couldn't let one ship have all the fun of making the galaxy look like idiots.
The coordinated rescue effort that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen.
Human ships provided the backbone of the operation with their adaptable life support systems and flexible cargo configurations. Kirilleth scouts served as pathfinders, using their speed and maneuverability to assess conditions and guide larger vessels through dangerous approach routes. Vorthan cargo ships provided massive transport capacity for the bulk evacuation phases.
Altarian medical teams ensured that refugees received proper care during transport.
Most importantly, Zalari engineers and coordinators managed the entire operation, proving that the people being rescued were perfectly capable of organizing their own salvation when given the resources and support to do so. The first target was settlement Kreshval, population 6,000, located in a frozen valley surrounded by crystalline formations that made traditional landing approaches nearly impossible. The Kirilleth scouts identified a route through the crystal maze, while Zalari engineers worked with human crews to develop specialized landing procedures for the icy conditions. The evacuation of Kreshval took 4 hours and required the coordinated efforts of 6 ships, but it was accomplished without a single casualty.
More importantly, it demonstrated that the improvised rescue fleet could handle complex, challenging operations that required precise coordination between multiple species.
Settlement Thurnlock, population 4,000, was built on a series of floating platforms on a partially frozen sea. The rescue operation there required Vorthan heavy lift capability to actually move the settlement's modular structures, allowing the evacuation ships to dock directly with the residential platforms. But it was the third settlement, Varinkol, with its population of 12,000, that presented the greatest challenge. The settlement was built inside a network of underground caverns, accessible only through vertical shafts that were too narrow for standard spacecraft.
The evacuation would require completely different tactics.
"We need to think about this differently," Dr. Marinvos explained during the planning session.
Varinkol was built underground specifically to take advantage of geothermal energy and protection from surface weather.
The cavern system is extensive, but the access shafts limit us to small craft only. Captain Santos of the Curiosity's Edge studied the geological surveys of the cavern system.
What if we don't try to bring them up through the shafts? What if we create new access points?
The solution they developed was audacious even by the standards of the rescue operation so far. Using the combined mining equipment from all the settlements they had already evacuated, plus specialized drilling gear from the Vorthan cargo ships, they would create new, larger access shafts that could accommodate full-sized evacuation craft. The operation took 8 hours of continuous work by teams of humans, Zalari, Kirilleth, and Vorthans. They drilled through solid rock while monitoring the increasingly unstable planetary conditions, racing against geological time that was running out rapidly. When they finally broke through into the cavern system of Varinkol, they found something unexpected. The settlement's population had used the time to organize their own internal evacuation procedures. 12,000 Zalari were waiting in organized groups, with essential supplies packed and transport routes planned. They had even prepared cultural preservation packages containing recordings, artifacts, and data archives that represented their community's history and knowledge. "We knew someone would come for us," explained settlement coordinator Liskvan as the first evacuation ship descended into the enlarged access shaft. "After we heard what happened at Threnvac, we knew that the galaxy still contained those who would not abandon us. So we prepared ourselves to be ready." The evacuation of Varinkol was the largest single rescue operation in recorded galactic history. 12,000 individuals, plus their cultural preservation materials, were evacuated from an underground settlement on a dying planet using an improvised fleet of ships from 6 different species. The operation took 14 hours to complete and required constant coordination between dozens of vessels and thousands of rescue personnel. When the last evacuation ship lifted away from Kethera's surface, carrying the final group of refugees from Varinkol, the planet had less than 2 hours left before complete geological collapse. In total, the improvised rescue fleet had saved over 30,000 Zalari lives that the official galactic evacuation effort had classified as unreachable. But, as Sarah stood on the observation deck of the evacuation station, watching Kethera's final death throes through the reinforced viewports, she realized that they had accomplished something far more significant than a successful rescue operation.
Ambassador Threnka approached her, his expression thoughtful and, perhaps slightly embarrassed. "Captain Chen, I owe you an apology. When this crisis began, the Galactic Council made decisions based on what we believed were practical necessities. We calculated resource requirements, assessed logistical capabilities, and determined optimal evacuation priorities based on mathematical efficiency.
And
Sarah prompted.
And we forgot the most important calculation of all, the value of refusing to accept that some people don't matter. What you and your allies accomplished here wasn't just a rescue operation. It was a demonstration that the galactic community's approach to crisis management may need fundamental revision. Sarah watched as Kethera's surface finally cracked apart in a brilliant display of geological violence. The planet that had been home to 2 billion Zalari was now just cosmic debris and superheated gas. But the vast majority of those 2 billion people were safe, scattered across dozens of evacuation stations and refugee ships throughout the system.
Ambassador, Sarah said quietly, there's something you should understand about humans. We don't calculate the value of lives based on efficiency metrics. We save people because they deserve to be saved. That's not a flaw in our thinking.
That's the entire point of having a galactic civilization in the first place. As the debris cloud that had once been Kethera began to disperse, Sarah knew that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy's understanding of what was possible when species worked together instead of making assumptions about each other's capabilities. The rescue of the Zalari was complete, but the real transformation was just beginning.